My name is Federico Garcia Lammers. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Architecture at South Dakota State University in the United States and a co-director of Labor, a design and research studio in South Dakota. The following is my presentation titled The Art of Labor, Collaborative Practices in the Work of Eladio Dieste. The first 4 slides in this presentation are the only slides that show images of Eladio Dieste's completed work. Each slide shows one of the 4 structural innovations in reinforced masonry, or cerámica armada, invented by Dieste through his practice in Uruguay, such as the ruled surfaces and Gaussian vaults of the Church of Christ the Worker, which was recently added to UNESCO's list of World Heritage Buildings. Dieste's work focused on resisting gravity through form by combining a local and traditional material like clay brick with the modern advent of steel, which can be seen in the double curvature Gaussian vaults of the Don Bosco Gymnasium. These slides are an introduction, and for many academics and students of architecture, these are familiar images of buildings you may know in person or have seen in publications, such as La Iglesia de San Pedro in Durazno, Uruguay. The remainder of the presentation will focus on historical images of buildings under construction, or the practice of arriving at the audacious structural solutions shown in the first 4 slides. I would like to start with 2 sentences that frame and synthesize the argument of this presentation. Even if these 2 sentences sound too reductionist of the scope of work, I hope that they at least clarify the position of this scholarly project. Eladio Dieste worked as an engineer in Uruguay, primarily during the second half of the 20th century. He was also an artist who organized labor. The first sentence is a fact. The second sentence is a speculation that allows me to probe into unexamined conditions within Dieste's body of work. Additionally, in these 2 sentences there are 2 words that specify the scope of my scholarship and research. Those 2 words are work and labor. The academic distinction between these 2 terms has been framed in an architectural context by several historians, practitioners, and academics, including Peggy Deemer and Pier Vittorio Leri. In both cases, the difference between work and labor is traced to the German philosopher Hannah Arendt. In The Human Condition, published in 1958, Arendt differentiates between work and labor by asserting that work is the production of things which have the capacity to outlive the life of its producer, much like buildings and their architects, while labor is the repetitive and unending task of reproducing life, such as giving birth, playing sports, or cooking. Labor is an event. It is conditioned by time and therefore does not leave any material behind. Counterintuitively, it is an immaterial condition. This distinction may reflect an outdated ethos, however it is relevant to contemporary conditions affecting the production of architecture. Architects are not involved in labor. In fact, in countries like the United States, architects have a legal alibi that excludes them from labor or the on-site choreography of bodies and materials. Instead, architects' work is focused on the immaterial forms of representational production, such as drawings, models, and other forms of technological or digital translations. I would like to propose that Dieste's work positions labor as a form of art through the development of material and immaterial forms of collaboration. This means that the labor, or the organization of bodies and materials on site, not only leaves a trace or evidence of its existence, as opposed to Arendt's claims of invisibility, but it becomes the most fundamental way of understanding the intrinsic qualities of Dieste's architecture, qualities that are largely unexamined. The conflicting relationship among work, labor, art, and architecture is examined in Peggy Deemer's The Architect as Worker, in which she suggests that architecture, unlike art, has seldom been able to position work as a form of artistic labor, in order to probe at the thin line between work and labor by working or laboring directly on the thing being produced. Instead, most architects have underestimated the potential to link mental or artistic production to material and technical production, as proposed by Walter Benjamin in The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. In order to examine the blurring distinction between work and labor, I will focus on two sets of relationships that affect Dieste's work. First are the technical relationships, in Hannah Arendt's terms defined by work, visible and quantifiable, which have a material manifestation. They result in built structures, such as the silo saman seen on the image on the left. Second are the artful relationships, defined by labor, which are invisible, devoid of material manifestation, such as the organization of bodies and materials on site, and other personal relationships. This presentation takes the position that understanding the space in between these two relationships is a fundamental way of examining the work of Eladio Dieste and asserting that in his particular case, labor is an intrinsic part of his art or the engineering of his architecture. The image on the left represents the technical relationships that define the methods of construction, while the image on the right points to the immaterial relationship with the artist Joaquin Torres Garcia. While these two sets of relationships seem very distant, they are the center of the collaborative means used to imagine and construct Dieste's work. Additionally, these two sets of relationships highlight that Dieste operated at two seemingly contradictory ends. One end is the development of complex forms, which were produced almost exclusively through numerical calculations, and unlike other engineers, architects, and artists that use graphical form-finding methods, such as Antoni Gaudí, Dieste resorted primarily to the abstraction of mathematical calculations to describe complex forms, which could be considered an extreme form of immaterial production. The other end highlights that the immateriality of his calculations are all the more significant when paired with the material dimensions of the movable and reusable formwork which enabled the construction of the abstract calculations into complex double curvature forms, such as the Gaussian vaults supported by ruled surface walls seen at the Iglesia del Cristo Obrero in Atlántida. The materialization of abstraction is at the crux of the first set of technical relationships. It demonstrates the potential to conflate work and labor into the practice of art and architecture by developing sophisticated networks that connect people, tools, and place. Let's examine the first set of technical relationships more closely. During Dieste's most active period in the second half of the 20th century, labor-intensive work was seen as an economic and social good in Uruguay. This is important because it challenges the very notion of progress that has evolved with the neoliberalist project in Uruguay and many other countries in Latin America. Dieste's buildings were coordinated by a job captain who was not an engineer or an architect. For the first 30 years of the firm, there were 3 job captains that Dieste relied upon heavily: Vittorio Vergalito, Vito Pacheco, and Alberto Hernandez. Each of these men worked with Dieste for over 30 years. Job captains like Pacheco were responsible for articulating construction processes to the workers on site. These men were the means through which the ingenuity of Dieste's innovations became materialized. In addition to working very closely with job captains and laborers, Dieste's collaboration with Heinz Strue from the Francisco Suttner Metal Shop in Uruguay was fundamental to the design and fabrication of formwork and construction mechanisms. Dieste's collaboration with Strue resulted in the development of pre-stressing patents and other construction technologies used in the reinforcement of self-supporting vaults in the Saesa market in Porto Alegre, Brazil. This collaboration was one of necessity because importing adjustable patent mechanisms to use as part of formwork was simply not financially affordable in Uruguay. Dieste's collaboration with Heinz Strue also resulted in the design and construction of numerous steel and timber formwork systems, which were used to construct large-span Gaussian vaults, such as the vaults at the Julio Herrera Enoves warehouse in Montevideo. By focusing on the design and graphic description of construction mechanisms and devices, Dieste's practice made evident and prioritized the role of labor, beginning to materialize the immaterial dimensions of Arendt's definitions of labor, by not representing forms but rather systems of construction. Let's focus on the second set of relationships, which will further highlight the prioritization of collective labor in Dieste's practice. The second set of relationships focuses on two personal relationships that are essential to considerations of immaterial labor. They rely on the qualitative aspect of Dieste's work and are the least examined. The first relationship is between Dieste and his business partner and fellow engineer Eugenio Montañez. This relationship enabled the development of Dieste and Montañez into a design, engineering, and construction practice. The second relationship is between Dieste and the world-renowned Uruguayan artist Joaquín Torres Garcia. In 1955, after they had collaborated with the Catalan architect Antoni Bonet on the Berlinieri house, Dieste and Eugenio Montañez formed a partnership and began their own engineering practice. Before forming Dieste and Montañez, Dieste collaborated with the engineering office of Christiani Nielsen and was also faculty at the School of Engineering in Montevideo, where he taught statics and structural mechanics. Eugenio Montañez was also an engineer who graduated from the School of Engineering in Montevideo. The start of the firm coincided with the start of one of Dieste's most iconic constructions, the Church of Christ the Worker, shown at the beginning of the presentation. Montañez was an expert in calculation, but his contribution to the studio was focused on business administration and management of large-scale projects that increased the impact and application of Dieste's structural innovations. Dieste's partnership with Montañez was crucial to the expansion of the scope and scale of work carried out by their practice. Montañez's influence can be seen in the growing number of large agricultural and factory building projects carried out throughout the 1970s and into Brazil. Their practice was unusual for Uruguay because they were not only a calculation studio like that of Mario Cimetto and other contemporary Uruguayan engineers, but rather Dieste and Montañez became a material and construction lab that operated as a design and build contractor. The distinction between work and labor was reconfigured to pursue the sense of cosmic economy that would lend an artful dimension to the labor at hand. Montañez's contributions should not be underestimated. According to Dieste, cosmic economy was a means to understand that the things that we build should be in accord with the profound order of the world. This definition may seem vague, even metaphysical, and in a contemporary discourse could be a surrogate for talking about sustainability. However, there's a pragmatic dimension to Dieste's definition of economy. In his definition, economy refers not only to the inherent cost of materials in construction, but also to conceptualizing innovation through structural material knowledge. The engineer Cezon, who accompanied Dieste in many construction projects, including the church in Atlantida, spoke about Dieste's intuitions as being framed by a deep sense of pragmatism, a way of finding economical means to construct, as we've seen in the design of formwork, pre-stressing patterns, and other construction mechanisms. In Dieste's opinion, the use of materials like reinforced concrete, a construction technology mined during the height of modernism, was not an economically sound option in Uruguay because it required substantial external material efforts coming into the country. But why talk about economy or even cosmic economy with a painting and not a spreadsheet or any other numerical calculations? This question is fundamental to one of the least explored yet known aspects of Dieste's immaterial relationship with the artist Joaquín Torres Garcia. Although these economic considerations may seem practical, even devoid of art, Dieste's conception of work was framed by his relationship with Joaquín Torres Garcia. Torres Garcia was born in Montevideo in 1874, emigrated to Barcelona to study art, and traveled throughout Europe and the United States before returning to Uruguay in 1934. Upon his return to Montevideo, he founded the Universal Constructivist movement and was a proponent for an original form of modern Latin American art language that materialized in what he referred to as the School of the South, published in 1935, a few years before being introduced to a young Eladio Dieste by Dieste's uncle, the poet Eduardo Dieste. Torres Garcia was focused on subverting traditional hierarchical structures to define the art of Latin America on its own terms. In an effort to make Latin American art independent from artistic centers of power, Torres Garcia saw the potential to link mental or artistic production to material and technical production. This link is the fundamental ingredient in Dieste's sense of cosmic economy and his ability to conceptualize the art of labor. In fact, the term cosmic was one of Torres Garcia's preferred ways of describing the social-political effects of the production of art in a new southern territory. These effects were popularized through his inverted America map, an ink on paper drawing that places the south of the continent in the north. The map is an expression of the subversive agenda proclaimed by the School of the South. The map also proposes a system of autonomy that is evident in Dieste's work, and this is a way of imagining the order of the world, which positioned Dieste closer to the renegade world of the arts than the language of modernism that was surrounding him at the time. Throughout his career, Dieste continued to try and address issues that were pointed to him by Torres Garcia and other artists of the School of the South. Again, it's easy to dismiss the idea of cosmic economy as a metaphysical pondering or simple abstraction. For this presentation, I have purposefully stayed away from cosmic economy in order to expand the potential implications of the term through the negotiation between work and labor. An ideal labor that exists somewhere between technics and art, two worlds that continue to drift apart in contemporary architecture. By studying and analyzing the collaborative practices in the work of Eladio Dieste, I hope to find better ways of linking these two worlds together.